Hello, everybody, and thanks for joining us. We're going to be discussing today, as the title of this video suggests, how to use an input file together with the Alma Analytics data visualization. So the situation is as follows. We have a file such as this. This is a file that the institution has with vendor codes that the institution has in Alma, and certain groups which internally in the institution are attributed to the vendors. So group one, for example, is this vendor code, and this vendor code, and this vendor code, and this vendor code, and then group two is this one, and this one, etc. And the institution wants to use these groups as part of their reporting in the data visualization. The vendor group is not a field in Alma, and therefore it's not in data visualization. But by loading this into the data visualization and combining this with the funds expenditure subject area, this can be used to create a workbook, a report in the data visualization. So let's see how that's done. So here we are in the data visualization. And from here, we will create a data set. That's how we'll begin. We'll begin by creating the data set. So on the top right here, we'll say create, and we'll create a data set. And we will click here to go get the file, or actually we can just drop it right there because I'm already in the directory. I'll just drop it right there. So we're dropping it in there. And here we are. So we see here the contents of that Excel file. Let me close that Excel file in case it's open, because it's not going to allow me later to do anything if it's open. It's bringing by default the name of the file as the name, and uploaded from, and then the name of the file. The description is the name of the file. Note it's got a little A here next to the vendor code and the vendor group, meaning it's an attribute and not a measure. We're going to be talking about that soon because that can be changed. We don't need to, but we will be pointing out where that can be changed. And let's say OK. So here we have on the bottom here, it says vendor code. It's got that A next to it. Vendor group, it's got that A next to it. And if I click on that A, so now I can change it to a measure or leave it as an attribute, but I want it as a attribute. I'm simply showing this in case you were to upload something with numbers and you wanted it to be a measure and it became an attribute. But we're going to leave it as it is. Now let's save. So I don't need to do save as. I'll do save. Up here on top, we've got a picture of a disk here. We'll say save. And let's not call it new data set. I'll call it the same as the name of the file, vendor groups per vendor code. And OK. So now I have saved a data set. I can see my data sets. If I come back here, I'm going to click this arrow on the top left here to go back home. I could click here where it says data. That's one option. Here's my data set, or I could say here, go to data. I click the three lines here on the top left, then data, and now I've got data here. So here's my vendor groups per vendor code. Now we want to add this to a workbook. So let's create a workbook. We'll say create a workbook, and let's say funds expenditures, and add to workbook. Okay, so now I'm creating a brand new workbook. Let's even start creating our workbook. I haven't yet added the data set. Let's say I want here the transaction. Let's say I want the expenditure amount. Let's say I want this as a table. And let's say I want this for, let's not even limit it by transaction date. We'll get all the transactions, all the expenditures. Let's get the vendor code here. Vendor code. By the way, you can see the vendor code here as an attribute. And so now I have the vendor codes and the expenditure amounts. Now I want to add the data set to this so that in addition to this vendor code, I can put in the vendor code that I have in my input file and the group. And then I can start to filter by the group, display the group, do whatever I'd like. So to add that data set, I'm going to click the plus here where it says add. Now, there's a lot of different ways to do this. I realize that I'm showing what is, I think, the easiest way to explain how to do this. But I know there are other ways to do this. If you have a better way to do this, go ahead. So let's add, and I'm going to say add data. And here is my data set, vendor groups. You can see it's got a slightly different icon there at the workbook. And now it appears down here. Now I can't yet add that to the report, to the workbook. If I try to add it, I'm going to drag it in. You see, I get a message there. Data from unjoined sets cannot be added. Data sets can be joined using the data diagram in the prepare section. So let's take care of that. We'll click data up on top in the center here. We're now on the visualize and we're clicking data. Now, if I put my mouse in the middle, you see it says 0. That means there's no connections between the funds expenditure subject area and my data set. I'm going to click that, and now I can make a connection. So where it says add another match, I'll click that, and now I can choose the data. So here is vendor groups per vendor code. That's my data set. And there I'm going to match the vendor code there to the vendor code that's in the funds expenditure subject area, because I need something in common between these two entities, the two entities being the funds expenditure subject area and my private data set. So let's take the vendor code here. Here's vendor, and here's vendor code. Okay, so now we've got a match between the vendor code in the new data set and the vendor code in the funds expenditure subject area. Here we can even say it's connected by the vendor code. Now let's go back. I'm going to click visualize again to go back on the top here. Now I can add those. So let's add them. Here's my private data set in the bottom left. I'll add that vendor code. Oop, I put it on top of the other vendor code, so I'll just add that. There we go. And now I'll add the vendor group not in Alma. Wonderful. So now I have, from the funds expenditure subject area, I've got the vendor code and the transaction expenditure amount. And then for my data set, I have the vendor code in Alma, this one here, and the vendor group, which I called vendor group not in Alma. So I've got the two fields on the right are from the funds expenditure subject area. Two fields on the left are from the new data set. Now, I've completed my task here. I've combined data from the input file, which is in a data set, with the funds expenditure subject area. However, it doesn't really look as nice as we could make it. So let's make it look a little nicer. So I want only those that have a group. My input file has, as you can see here on the right, 15 vendors. The first row is the title, so it's got 15 vendors, and I have a lot more vendors in Alma, but I'm only interested in these 15, so I'm going to get all of those that where the vendor group here is not null. So there's a lot of ways to do that. Let's add it with an expression filter. So I'll click here on the funnel on the top here, and we'll say create an expression filter. Let's drag in that vendor group not in Alma and say is not null. Let's validate that I put it in correct. It says calculation validated, apply, beautiful. Now we've got the group and the expenditure amount. We don't need those vendors in the middle because we just want the group and the expenditure amount. So we'll get rid of those. I'm going to click the little X here in the middle. Vendor code, I'll get rid of that, and I'll get rid of that. Now I've got just the group and the expenditure amount. Let's even make that look a little nicer. Let's duplicate this one. I'll say edit, duplicate that visualization, and let's change on the bottom here to toggle the data panel, toggle the grammar panel. Now I've got a lot of room here. This one on the right, let's make it a donut. So we got pies, we got donuts. Let's have a donut. And I'm going to put back the panels here for a moment. Let's say we want, make it a little nicer. We'll put the vendor group in the color. So I'm going to drag this on the left here to the color. Beautiful. So now we see, for example, we have 50.51% are group 4. Group 3, 8.3. By the way, they're interactive as well. I can click here and you see it highlights here. I can click here, it highlights in the table. See, when I click these, it highlights in the table. That's already going past our goal here of adding the data set to the data visualization. But we have here both fields. The groups are coming from our data set. The expenditure amount is coming from the data visualization. So we have successfully combined data from our input file, which made the data set, with the data which is in the funds expenditure subject area. Thanks a lot, everybody, for joining, and we'll see you soon in our next video. Have a nice day.